Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this lovely Monday morning. Thank you, as always, for joining us for our Bible reading talk for today. And I've noticed this weekend that we are beginning now our gentle run towards Christmas. I say gentle. Yesterday was what's commonly known as the last Sunday before Advent. Colloquially used to be known as Stir Up Sunday. The collect, the special prayer used to begin, Stir up, O Lord, the wills of your faithful people, which people used to take as a hint to stir up their Christmas puddings ready for Christmas. Anyway, I'm waffling on talking nonsense, but that's why it used to be called Stir Up Sunday. And this coming weekend is beginning of Advent. But you've come in this morning to hear about the Psalms, and we're in Psalm 14 this morning. We're in. Remember, there are 150 Psalms. There are 5 books therein, and book 1 is Psalm 1 to 41. So we're in about a third of the way through book 1, and it's Psalm 14. And here goes. Fools say in their hearts, there is no God. They are corruptible. They do abominable deeds. There's no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on humankind to see if there are any who are wise, who seek after God. They've all gone astray. They've all alike perverse. There is no one who does good, no, not one. Have they no knowledge, all the evildoers, who eat up my people as they eat bread, and do not call upon God? There shall they be in great terror, for God is with the company of the righteous. You would confound the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. Oh, that deliverance for Israel will come from Zion. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, Jacob will rejoice, Israel will be glad. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, it's an interesting psalm, this one. It's very different to what we've had so far. I want to see first 4 things I want to bring out this morning's reading. Firstly, I want you to see the variety that is to be found in these 150 psalms. Sometimes the writer, usually David, but not always, usually the writer talks to God. Sometimes the writer talks about God. And sometimes, like Psalm 23, the Lord's my shepherd, he kind of varies it about. Sometimes he talks to God, sometimes he talks about God, bits and matches therein. He also, when he's talking, sometimes he talks to people, and he talks to all sorts of people. He talks to people in worship, come let's join and come together and worship. Sometimes he talks to the enemy, sometimes he even talks to himself. Bless the Lord, O my soul, all that is within me, bless his holy name. So sometimes he talks to himself. So I want you to see here the variety. And what you have here in Psalm 14 is kind of different again. He doesn't actually address God at any point in the psalm. It's not a kind of woe situation. This one reads a bit like David sat down with a group of people, maybe even a group of children, and it reads like something out of the book of Proverbs. It reads like he's got a group of people together, and he's giving them a lecture, or he's giving them a talk, that kind of thing. So you might call it a parable. So it does read a bit like something out of the book of Proverbs. So here we have David talking to a group of people. He's not talking to God. He's talking, just giving them a whole lot of teaching about what is wise and what is foolish. Okay. So the first thing I kind of want you to get you to see this morning is the sheer variety. As I say, sometimes talking to God, sometimes talking about God, sometimes mixing and matching, sometimes talking to friends in worship, sometimes talking to the enemy, sometimes even talking to himself. But here, as I say, in this Psalm 14, you get the impression that David has sat down with a group of people, quite possibly a group of children. And like Jesus did with parables, or like happens in the book of Proverbs, dare I say, that David begins with his talk here in Psalm 14. So first he gets the variety in the Psalms and also the context. This is the teaching situation here in Psalm 14. Then, what's this about? Well, at first glance, it reads like a rant or a tirade, if you like, against atheists. The fool says in his heart, there is no God, and so on and so on and so on. And it does sound like, as I say, a bit of a tirade against atheists. And I think, actually, for lots of people, I've seen it interpreted in that way in kind of Christian literature and so on. But I don't think that's per se what it's talking about. I mean, there are people who become atheists because of their experience in life, or they've had a think, or they particular back, or whatever it may be, and they've decided intellectually that there isn't a God. Now, they're wrong. I think they're hugely mistaken, and I would take issue with them all the way. I think they're completely mistaken. I really do. But I don't think that's what David is railing against here in Psalm 4. I don't think he's railing against people who have come to an intellectual conclusion that there isn't a God. I think he's talking here about people who act as if there is no God. The word folly in the Hebrew, it implies sort of somebody who, it's not that they don't say believe in God or not, it's more that, it's an act of defiance. Because there's no God, I will do such and such, such and such. So it's not so much somebody who doesn't believe in God, it's more a question of somebody who's defiant, who thinks that it doesn't matter what I do, I'll do what I like. It's a sort of defiance. So it's not so much somebody who's an intellectual atheist, it's again somebody who acts as if there is no God, if you see what I mean. I mean, there are atheists out there who many I'm sure, who are very nice people, who are very pleasant and kind, who do good things, who don't act like the people in the psalm here. But what I think David is railing against here is people who act as if there is no God, who go around and eat up the poor and treat people horribly and act foolish. And I think that's what he talks about as folly here. I don't think he's talking, as I say, about intellectual atheists. I think he's talking here about people who act, who say, because there's no God, I can do what I like, and therefore they go and they do. And that's what he's talking about as the folly here, and the foolish person here. But then go on actually in the psalm, and you realise, what does David think about the psalm, about these people? And it's quite interesting that at no point does he ask God to pour boiling oil on their heads. He doesn't seek for revenge, if you like. But he does go on to say, there they shall be in great terror, for God is with the company of the righteous. You would confound the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. He doesn't at any point, as I say, ask God to take revenge against these people. He doesn't, as I say, doesn't ask God to pour boiling oil on their heads or inflict sores on their bodies or anything like that, or meteorites from heaven or anything like that. He implies that because they're acting as if there is no God, then when trouble comes, they're on their own. Whereas with the poor, he talks about here, or the righteous, when they get into difficulties, they're not on their own because they have God with them. So it's not that there's active revenge here that David is seeking. It's more a question that without God, when times get difficult, you're on your own. Whereas with God, you do so with a Heavenly Father helping us, loving, carrying us and supporting us as we do. And that's the difference. So here in this psalm, David does not seek active revenge from God, but instead he says that if you have God with you, then God, you'll know God's love and support with you. But if you haven't got God with you, if you push God out of your life, then when it happens, then if you like, then you're on your own. And then finally, I want to say one thing, because I like to try and bring in Jesus, even though this psalm was written several hundred years before Jesus. Jesus said, we had 10 commandments before, and Jesus brought them down to 2 commandments. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And he also said, love your neighbour as yourself. And actually, that's what true wisdom is all about. Folly is doing the opposite. Folly is not caring about God and not caring about your neighbour. True wisdom is about doing what Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And love your neighbour as yourself. That is true wisdom. Folly, the foolish person here, is somebody who loves neither God nor neighbour, because he acts in disregards to God and he eats up the poor and so on. Whereas a wise person is someone who does what Jesus said, which is to love God with your heart, soul, mind and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. Love God and neighbour. So my friends, in this unusual psalm this morning, see firstly the variety which is in this wonderful book of the Psalms. That's different. You hear different voices, different people are addressed, and here we have David sitting down and doing like a proverb, doing like a parable, teaching people wisdom. Okay. Secondly, see that whilst it reads a bit like it, I don't think it's acting against intellectual atheists. This is acting against people who defiantly act as if there is no God. Okay, so there isn't. Therefore, that means they feel they can do what they like. Thirdly, notice David doesn't actually actively seek revenge from God, But he does say, he is implying here that if you have God in your life, that when times get difficult, you have some support and love. And if you don't, if you push God out of your life, then when that happens, and you don't in quite the same way. But he also goes on to talk about the difference between wisdom and folly. A wise person is somebody who, as Jesus said, loves God and the neighbour. A foolish person is someone who loves neither. My friends, I hope that makes some sense to you. God bless you. Have a